I went supersonic. My color vision dimmed, and then darkness started to close in until I couldn't see anything at all. I was just seeing black. I almost lost consciousness, and that's how everything changed. Junior year of college, I got to go on a base visit through my Air Force ROTC, and I got to stand on the ramp and watch two F-15s taking off in full afterburner, and it was at dusk. You got the orange afterburner flame coming out the back, you have the jet noise that just vibrates your whole body. I just got goosebumps, and I knew then that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I went off to pilot training, which took about 2 years, and that gets more and more competitive. And I think I was working the hardest, possibly, that I ever have, but I also found it really fun and exciting. You get to the end of that program and you fill out a dream sheet. I decided to put the F-16 first, and that's what I ended up getting. F-16 training was definitely a progression in difficulty from pilot training, and that really became more apparent to me as I went off to my first operational squadron. It's almost like on-the-job training, where you do have a few months where you're getting graded rides, but once you're done with those flights, you are now cleared where you could go to combat. And that's where it started to get really challenging and where some doubt started to creep in. My second flight in country is what you would know as dogfighting. It's where one aircraft versus another, and I was the one that was offensive. The other aircraft had my instructor in it, so my goal was to get that other airplane in front of mine so I could employ weapons against it. I had done this mission when I was going through the schoolhouse for the F-16, so I was kind of familiar with it, but things happen very quickly when you're a fighter pilot, especially when you're a new fighter pilot. We're operating somewhere around 500 miles an hour. And to give you a little context on G-forces, right now we're at 1 G force of gravity. 9 Gs, you feel like you weigh 9 times the force of gravity.
Squeeze your butt, breathe, push out with your abs,
and
breathe.
In those conditions, the blood gets forced out of your head because your heart is not strong enough to counteract all that force. And that leads to a G-lock, which is G-induced loss of consciousness. So my flight that day, I knew I would hit 9 Gs when I rolled and pulled back on the stick, but I also knew that it should be just for a short amount of time before the aircraft would start to slow down, and I should quickly be able to point at my instructor in his aircraft, employ the mock weapons against him, call the kill, and celebrate, get bragging rights. That's what every young fighter wingman wants. That is not what happened. In a split second, essentially, I saw that my color vision dimmed, and then darkness started to close in until I couldn't see anything at all. I could still hear at that point, and at that moment, my instructor actually realized that something wasn't quite right with what I was doing with my jet, and he made a radio call to end the fight. So he called Knock It Off, which is the code name that we use to end a dogfight. And so luckily, I was still enough with it that I was able to hear that and go ahead and pull back on the throttle with my left hand. And once I did that, the jet started to slow down, the G started to drop, and I regained my vision. In the debrief that day, we pulled up my tapes. He looked at me and he said, "If you keep doing that, you're going to kill yourself." I actually sat on my kitchen floor and I cried, which is not something I normally do. I'm not especially emotional, and it's because I feel like that was such a representation of me not deserving to be there and not being good enough to be there. That was the low point of my career by far. I already was in an intimidating environment. I was one of 2 women in a squadron of almost 50 pilots. I was trying to find my identity, figure out how to come across as confident when I wasn't. The idea of failing seemed more serious to me than pushing a G-lock to the limit. That flight sent me down this road of feeling it over my head. So in briefings or in meetings where they needed me to speak up or where I had a question, and instead of asking the question, I would just keep my mouth shut because I didn't want everyone else to realize how little I knew, even though that was normal because I was brand new to this career. You start to feel like everyone else is watching you and judging you. I think it took me that whole entire first assignment, which was about 3 years, to start to crawl back out of that. It naturally started to happen with just getting more proficient in the career field. You realize that there's a learning curve, there's a learning process, and some of it just takes a lot of hard work over a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. Going off to my next assignment in Texas, you could admit your mistakes. You could all just move forward and learn from them. That fear of judgment and ridicule or shame or embarrassment or all of those negative feelings that can come with failure, that was kind of gone. That really set the stage for me to be able to grow pretty quickly, both personally and professionally. So after about 3 years in Texas, I happened to see an email that the Thunderbirds were hiring. And so that was another very exciting point in my career when I got the phone call that I was actually going to be joining the Thunderbirds. Nothing would have changed if I had continued to let my fear control my decisions. The type of flying that was done on the Thunderbirds was just so different than what I was used to. After a bad flight with the Thunderbirds, which I had plenty, I would get that initial kind of self-doubt, and then I would remember all of the things I went to get to that spot, all of the people that were involved in the decision to hire me, and that kind of gave me the confidence to realize that I did deserve to be there and that I could overcome this. I think it can be really tempting in a high-pressure environment to come across as this perfect person with no doubt, with no mistakes, and it's actually the opposite. No one expects you to prove yourself and to be perfect. They expect you to put in the work, and they expect you to try and keep working towards the goal, but no one expects perfection. I think the thing that proves that you deserve to be there is to get competence, right? It doesn't come from the confidence, it comes from the competence. But really focusing on the hands-on skills and how you can be as good as possible in the career and focusing on that. And once you're really good at your job, no one can question whether you deserve to be there or not. Remember, failure is not an endpoint, but a stepping stone.